be a half an hour or so presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions after that. So just be patient with us for a couple more minutes before we get started. Thank you.
In the meantime, I'll take this opportunity. Road to Recovery has an Instagram now. If anyone wants to come follow us, I am new to handling Instagrams for organizations such as this, but our handle is R2R Birds. So please give us a follow.
Justin, if you want to put your slide, your leading slide up, we will get started momentarily. Hopefully you'll be able to share your screen. Perfect.
Yeah, thank
Great. It's coming on. Might put it in presentation mode. There you go. Perfect. Justin, you're set. Bernardo, I've been continued to try to assign you as interpreter for the presentation, but I've not been successful yet. So given that the presenters will be in English, we will just have the English version, I suspect, unless I can sort this out during the process.
All
Anyway,
right.
welcome everyone to Road to Recovery's continuing monthly webinar series. We are so thankful that you have joined us today and hope and know that you will enjoy the next hour. We will have a terrific presentation lined up for you for the next 30, 40 minutes. And then we will leave plenty of time for questions and dialogue associated with the presentation. So again, welcome. My name is Paul Schmidt. I'm the current executive director, but I'm a short timer with Road to Recovery now. Since the beginning, about 3.5 years ago, I have served in this role. Previous to that, I was with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for about 35 years, and then Ducks Unlimited for a few years as well. So you can tell that I am nearing, and indeed at the end of this career. It's been a true pleasure. This will be my last webinar as the executive director, as far as I know. We are actively in pursuit of a candidate to fill this role and hopefully be able to join the next month's webinar. I've enjoyed it and hope you have gained something from Road to Recovery over the past few years and continue to do so into the future. We have a great presentation, as I said today. And first thing I will do is introduce Kat Temple, who is our graduate fellow for Road to Recovery, and she will introduce and navigate through the presentation. Kat?
Thanks, Paul. I will say that that talk made me sad and excited for you. But on a happier note, we are lucky to have both Justin Springer and Justin Saunders here today to talk to us about Caribbean bird conservation. Justin Springer will be talking to us first. He's an ecologist with 12 years of experience working on biodiversity projects across Latin America, the Caribbean, and the United Kingdom. He has worked in biodiversity assessment, monitoring research, policy development, and international development, working with NGOs, government agencies, and private organizations to implement conservation actions on the ground that benefit both people and nature. As Caribbean Program Officer at Rewild, his project portfolio entails working with local partners to assist species recovery by supporting conservation action planning processes for 7 species across the region, including planning for the Jamaican blackbird, Bahama oriole, St. Vincent parrot, and St. Vincent whistling warbler. And Justin Saunders who will be presenting second, is an environmental scientist and program director with a decade of experience working on research and community-based conservation initiatives in Jamaica. As president of BirdLife Jamaica and a key team member at the Jamaica Environment Trust, he has managed campaigns, organized public engagement events, and overseen grant-funded projects focused on biodiversity, solid waste management, and sustainable development. Justin brings a blend of grassroots organizing, strategic planning, and field-based research to his work, consistently championing nature-based solutions and inclusive environmental education. Everyone, please welcome both Justin Springer and Justin Saunders. If you guys can hold your questions until the end or write them in the chat, we can read them out at the end. Thanks. Take it away, Justin.
Thank you so much, Kat, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Kat would have alluded to earlier, my name is Justin Springer, and I am the Caribbean Program Officer at Wild. It gives me great pleasure to join the R2R family today to speak a bit about, the work that we are doing as an organization across the Caribbean in protecting our birds. And I want to also take time to highlight many of our partners who you can see their logos in the bottom of my slide, because without them, none of this would be possible. So just to start, the aim of this presentation is to essentially just provide an overview of conservation action planning across the Caribbean based on my experiences with 4 endemic bird species, and we're looking particularly at land birds for this presentation. And the aim is to explore some of the planning process, some of the values that would have come out as part of that process, the threats that some of our birds face, as well as some of the solutions that were derived coming out of these planning processes. So just to give a bit of a quick overview of the region and why we need to protect it. As some of you may know, the Caribbean is a biodiversity hotspot. It has over 10,000 endemic species and ranks in the top 3 of the world's biodiversity hotspots. As typical with hotspots, it has suffered some of the highest extinction rates in modern history through a series of impacts. We know that about 10% of the global bird extinctions that have occurred within the region. And this is a great concern because we have a lot of biodiversity here. We have a lot of endemic species here that have evolved over time. And specifically in the region, we know that we have 185 endemic bird species. And so it's very important that we do our best to conserve them. As part of the Call to Action project, which is sponsored by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, Rewild and Fauna and Flora, as well as local partners across 5 different countries, embarked upon the Call to Action project, which really aims to help enable organizations to manage endemic species, create conservation action plans, and also help to build capacity to local partners in helping them in their species recovery. As part of the project, there were several project countries that we focused on and worked with local partners within these countries to help develop conservation action plans. The Jamaica blackbird was one species in Jamaica. In the Bahamas, it was the Bahama oriole. And most recently in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we collaborated with our partner Birds Caribbean, as well as other local partners there to help facilitate the conservation action planning workshop for the St. Vincent parrot and the St. Vincent whistling warbler. So just to give a bit of a background context on the birds that we'll be focusing today, the Jamaica blackbird is a small to medium-sized bird that's endemic to the beautiful island of Jamaica. And Justin Saunders will touch a bit about that later in his presentation. The bird is localized. It usually lives within wet mountain forests, foraging on branches, in bromeliads, mosses for insects, and other invertebrates. Currently is the most endangered bird in Jamaica. The second bird would be the Bahama oriole that we helped to facilitate the conservation action planning workshop for. This also is a medium-sized oriole that's endemic to the island of Andros in the Bahamas. It usually lives within pine forest. For many of you who have been to Andros before, as you drive their
Ai
pine
senti,
forest.
prima Shira kıya, klinik aşıda turizm sınavı nasıl bolda av, kay
Um,
buldun enta.
sorry, thank you. Thank you very much. So it lives within these pine forests, feeding on fruits, insects, and other invertebrates across the island. The population estimate is about 2,400 to 8,400 individuals, and this is endangered. This gives a bit of perspective on the habitat that the oriole inhabits. These are the pine forests that you can see stretching right across Andros. And if you look here clearly, you can see under these fronds, these palm fronds, the oriole weaves a very intricate nest from like fibers, and it attaches it onto the bottom side of the frond that's hanging down. Here you can see on the right, two of my colleagues were doing surveys looking for the nest on Andros. The next bird is the whistling warbler, which is endemic to the island of St. Vincent. This lives within montane forests in palm brake habitats, and it usually likes wet, mossy forest areas, feeding on insects and other invertebrates, as well as fruit. This is also endangered, as we know right now. You can see clearly here in the map on the left-hand side, located in the center, that is the Central Mountainous Ridge. And most of the wobblers, based on the point counts and bird sightings that were conducted by Birds Caribbean and colleagues, Forestry Department, and other entities involved in research of the warbler, you can see clearly that the warbler inhabits this central mountain range here, which is a densely forested area. The next bird is the St. Vincent parrot, which is a very beautiful, large parrot, vibrant color. They have two color morphs, and it's endemic to St. Vincent as well. It is the national bird, and it feeds on fruits, seeds, flowers. And like the warbler, it also lives in the central mountains of St. Vincent. The status is currently vulnerable, and the population estimate is about 850 to 1,100 individuals. As you can see from this map, it also inhabits the central forested area, but there are also sightings in the lower areas around because the parrot forages and feeds on fruits. And so they are often found in farmland that is on lower elevated areas across the country. So going back to the main topic, which is conservation action planning, it's important for us to understand why conservation action planning is important. Yes, we do see these beautiful species. A lot of them are threatened. We have our different reasons for conserving them and protecting them. And there are several activities that are usually conducted within each country to protect and conserve these species by different groups and different entities. But conservation action plans are very important to do several things. And this is essentially to minimize impacts of the known threats to the species, improve the habitat conditions, and also streamline efforts to conserve the species as we know it. We know that over the region, and I was doing a bit of research, and I would have sent out the email yesterday to get some idea of how many conservation action plans were done for Caribbean birds over time. And we know that historically the big-nosed thrush, which is a migratory land bird, as well as the Kirtland's warbler, have had very successful conservation action plans that have been implemented over time. Also, the black-capped petrel, as well as other birds across the region, have had conservation action plans developed. As it relates to land birds, we know there are about 185 endemic land birds, and these are some of the conservation action plans that have been developed over time. However, based on speaking to colleagues and other individuals, it seems as though there is a gap in terms of the amount of species, particularly land birds, that have had conservation action plans developed for them. And so it's important that we look at this as a potentially area that can be improved upon to help facilitate the conservation of our threatened bird species. So the conservation action planning process that we usually undertake is the conservation planning specialist group principles and steps. We usually follow that, which has about about 7 different principles that you employ as you prepare to create these plans. You work with your different partners and agencies to help implement these plans. You have to go through a very intricate process of development, consultation before the plan is developed. And so often or not, we have a workshop process. And this workshop process, this was the one that was held in Jamaica for the Jamaica Blackbird. Excuse me. We have a wide range of stakeholders from different entities involved. In the case of Jamaica, we usually have the Protected Area Management Authority. We have different government agencies, regardless of if they're in charge of the habitat management, they're in charge of enforcement of the laws and legislation that protect the habitat and the species. We also want persons that are involved in land use planning. And then certainly you need to have persons who have an acute understanding of the species involved. So the scientific authority, researchers, or anyone who's in charge of researching about the species itself. This was in the Bahamas for the Bahama Oriole. We also had a very wide range of stakeholders involved in the action planning workshop. And at the workshop, we asked several questions. We really want to find out from persons, why do we want to conserve this species? Why are we here? It's very important to understand what is the value of the species that we are trying to protect so that we're not wasting time. And often or not in our workshops, we keep it very engaged, very interactive. We allow people to write on paper and say why. And for the case of the Bahama Oriole, person said that the bird is important for cultural preservation. It's an endemic, so it's only found here, nowhere else. Other cases, person said that the Oriole has the same colors as the Bahamian flag. And you can see the flag here, the yellow and the black color, very distinct colors. And so it can be used as a symbol of national heritage and a connection to the culture. Also, persons highlighted that it's important in the ecosystem as a predator consuming insects and invertebrates. And after we look at the values across all the different species, there were several things that kept coming out all the time. While we understand the value of the species, there are common threats that a lot of our birds face. One of the key threats is habitat loss and degradation. Another is invasive alien species, particularly from cats, rats, mongooses in some cases, as well as brood parasitism from the shiny cowbird. Another threat that was common was that of climate change. We know that in the Caribbean, we face a lot of hurricanes. There's a hurricane season every year. And so natural disasters like hurricanes are ever imminent threats. I'm going to touch a bit on some of the threats in more detail now. Habitat loss is one that usually comes up in a lot of our workshops. I cannot underscore how serious this impact is. A lot of the time, in the cases of these birds, for example, the parrot and the warbler, they live within forested areas. And this picture in the back is the St. Vincent Parrot Reserve, which is about 5.8 square kilometers. It's located within the central region of the country. And it protects the parrot, but it also protects the warbler. However, what we do find is that in the case of many protected areas, in some cases, the boundaries are not always clearly demarcated. Some cases, there's a lack of signage. There's very limited patrolling, or if there is patrolling, it's very difficult to cover the entire boundaries of the area 24/7. And so sometimes there's a lack of restriction in access, and that sometimes allow for a lot of encroachment or negative activities to occur. One challenge in St. Vincent that we found was the unregulated farming practices that happen, particularly of taro, or some persons locally would know it as dasheen, which is a root crop. It's popularly known as is used in cooking very widely across St. Vincent and in the rest of the Caribbean as well. And sometimes what you find is there are a lot of farmers who grow taro and they push the farms close up to the boundary edge of the forest, encroaching on forest habitat. There's also sometimes unregulated farming of crops like cannabis or marijuana, which is often conducted in a clandestine way. Sometimes persons may go into the forest and cut small areas, small patches, plant the marijuana in those areas. This is also popular along the slopes of the La Soufrière volcano, which has very rich soils. And a lot of this is driven by the local demand for food, for drugs, and it puts pressures on local farmers to go into new and hidden areas. And what this does is it often degrades and fragments the habitat. And for particular birds like, let's say, the parrot or the warbler, which require, mature forest, even the Jamaican blackbird, which requires mature forest, the more fragmented the habitat becomes, the more challenging it becomes for these species to exist because they already have such narrow niches. The association of farming comes with pesticide use, as farmers use pesticides to control insects. And what happens is, as they use pesticides, they not only reduce the amount of insect populations that are there that can provide food sources for these birds, but they also pollute the watershed by polluting the water supply, where you get seepage occurring into rivers. And as that flows downwards, it can pollute the water supply for human beings, causing potential health risk. You also have the cases of invasive alien species. Every single workshop that we've conducted and species we've examined had challenges with invasive alien species. And that is one of the major challenges that a lot of our species and birds as well included face, whether they're rats, whether they're mongooses, and your friendly neighborhood cat that you love. It may have a lovely, cute face, but cats are very, very much responsible for a lot of the consumption of birds, reptiles, and other species across the world. And so they also create problems for some of our birds across the region. Another threat is the shiny cowbird, which is a brood parasite and has been causing challenges across the region. We do know that they currently affect the Bahama oriole significantly. We do know they're in Jamaica, so they're a threat to the Jamaican blackbird, and they're also a potential threat to the St. Vincent whistling warbler and the parrot. Unregulated fires are also big challenges, especially in Andros, where there's so many pine trees. And when you get a buildup of biomass material in the lower story, what happens is over time, you get these long, persistent, very intense hot fires that can cause massive destruction of the pine forest. We also found that human-wildlife conflict was an issue in some cases with the St. Vincent parrot because they feed on fruits and they don't just stay to the forest. They sometimes encroach on farmers' habitats, impacting their crops. So they love mangoes. I mean, we all love mangoes. And they also eat passion fruits, which are delicacies across the island. So you can imagine the potential conflicts that are created when these birds then fly into farmland areas and consume their crops. Excuse me. Poaching and wildlife trafficking is also an issue. There's been illegal trafficking that has occurred across the Caribbean in the past, and it is an existential threat. This is largely driven by a high demand for parrots, especially in European markets, where people can spend in excess of 10,000 US dollars for a rare species to add to their private collections. The challenge is because as many of us in the Caribbean, we have islands, a lot of them are open, the borders are very porous, so people may not necessarily come through the ports of the official ports of entry. They can come in on yachts and boats, access local persons who might be able to guide them to where these birds are, and smuggle out birds very easily. So this creates a challenge as well. As I would have mentioned earlier, hurricanes, natural disasters are big issues. Hurricane Beryl last year came through and caused widespread destruction in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so with the destruction of mature forests and large trees that, like for example, the parrot rely on, or that the whistling warbler relies on for their habitat, this creates a challenge. And in some cases, we've seen that after hurricanes, it impacts the birds and their habitat. Another challenge is the ever-looming threat of natural disasters like the La Soufrière volcano eruption, which occurred in 2021, causing widespread damage. Forest habitat was destroyed, landslides occurred. And following the eruption, research shows that many birds would have moved to lower farmlands searching for food. So you can understand that with the displacement of birds to lower farmland areas, this could then potentially create an issue and create more conflict with farmers. So you can see how many of our species are, in a sense, challenged and between all of these different challenges that are occurring and threatening their very survival. So it's important. I mentioned a lot of the threats just now, but it's also important to know some of the drivers. These threats don't just occur on their own or drop out the sky. There are a lot of common drivers that we saw pushing these things forward. And so in many cases, it was the increasing human population in some of our islands. Our islands are not growing any bigger. Some of them are very small. They have very limited space in which people can live. And so with increasing human populations, you start to see an increase in development that's happening. In many cases, some of the development is unregulated. It's not monitored properly. And because then you have poor regulation of enforcement and legislation that's in place, often or not, you get to the cases where people go into areas that they should not, and they're not always regulated effectively. We see that there is legislation in many of our islands, like some of the countries have wildlife protection acts, but in many cases, the legislation require updates. A lot of them are outdated, they're antiquated. Some of the fines are very minimal. And then there's very weak punishment in place. So in some cases, persons said that if, for example, persons got caught with a particular bird species, sometimes they go to the court, but the judge may give them a very light fine or a warning, which is seen as a slap on the wrist. And sometimes these fines are very low and minimal, and persons would happily pay the fine, come out and repeat the crime again. So in some cases, we realize that the legislation needs to be stronger and it needs to be enforced more in a more comprehensive way. We also realize that education and awareness is severely lacking in many cases. Some persons know about the birds, other persons do not. And then in some cases, persons may know and be aware of the importance of the species, but they don't know the role it plays in the ecosystem. Or they don't also know what are the implications of if I harm this species, what laws are in place to protect this species, and what is the punishment that I will face if I harm the bird. And so we realize that education and awareness is a very key component in educating people about the importance of these species and why they need to be protected. In some of our countries, many of our countries, they have protected areas. But the challenges is that in many cases, they're not always demarcated clearly. There's not always clear signage to show people when I'm entering the protected area. And there's a lack of enforcement from the management authorities, whether that's having rangers or boots on the ground. In many cases, a lot of organizations have limited capacity in the form of staffing or money or resources to effectively survey and monitor these areas to protect the given species. So these are just some of the common challenges that we find, the common drivers of these challenges. And we usually will put this up in a problem tree analysis as we explore the threats, the problems, and what drives them. We usually put them together in a problem tree to see how they're all connected. And what it does is it gives a clear overview of the present situation, including the threats and their underlying causes. Then we look at solutions. We don't just dwell on the problems, but we look at solutions. And some of the common solutions that we've found or that have been generated was that the legislation often or not needs to be updated. They need to increase fines, have heavier punishments in some cases, improve the regulation of this legislation. There needs to be improved education and awareness programs that are strategic and targeted to different groups. And in the case of protected areas, they need to be demarcated. They need to have improved signage, improved enforcement, which connects with the appropriate allocation of resources to the management authorities in charge so that they can do their job effectively. A lot of this also needs to be supported by robust research and monitoring, as well as invasive species management programs. We also encourage our workshop participants to vision what they would like for the species. So what would you like to see happen now that you've been through this workshop, you've seen the challenges, you've talked about solutions? Where do you see this species in 10 years or 20 years? So people can have a collective agreement on what that looks like. And this is just one of the goals that was generated for the Jamaica Blackbird workshop. And they spoke about having the blackbird in well-protected and expanding broadleaf forests. The birds in their habitat will form part of ongoing community-led tourism, research, and education programs. We also encourage them to develop objectives that support the goal. And then a lot of it is very collaborative. Persons get around the table, they get in breakout groups, they share their ideas, they share their opinions, and they come up with these actions then to help support the objectives and the goal. We find that this is very participatory, and we find that persons often love this a lot, and they also learn a lot about the species through this process. Often or not, people may go to workshops and they just sit down and hear presentations, but it's also very fun for them and very educational for them when they can come and be a part of a process to discuss how do we want to improve the status of this species, or what can we do to be a part of the conservation of this species. We encourage them to share. And if you can look on the left, this is Justin, who will come later, and they speak a bit about their experiences or what they generated in their groups. Just to go through quickly, some objectives that come out. We usually have different objectives. In this case, education and outreach was an objective for the Jamaica Blackbird. And here we see the actions in the next 5 years that they were able to generate. We also talk about capacity and the needs that they have. This is the plan that was generated for the Jamaica Blackbird. Going back to capacity, we speak about capacity needs, we speak about what you need in terms of money, equipment, resources, staffing, so that when the plan is finished, they have a comprehensive idea of what needs to happen, but also what are the resources they need to implement it. What we found through our experiences is that this conservation action planning process is very efficient. You have multiple agencies involved, even though you have a lot of very busy professionals with limited time. But we find that we do this training, we do the workshop over 2 days, and it's very quick, it's very efficient, it's very participatory. So persons you're able to share their opinions, they're able to get consensus on different ideas as it generates the best thinking. We also say that like no one person is right. And usually at the end of the workshops, persons come and they say, I really had a good time. I learned a lot about this bird. I never knew so much was happening in this space about the bird. And it opens their mindsets that there are other people working to help protect the species. Through that, I think there's a greater push for collaboration, because persons are able to meet other agencies and other people they don't know and see how they can collaborate and work together, and then have a collective ownership and accountability for the plan. We also find that it's very engaging. We use diverse tools and exercises, and through that process, we can engage persons and help to get the best ideas and thinking out of them throughout the workshop. As a finish and as a close, I just want to acknowledge our sponsors, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, and all of our different partners who made these workshops possible, and who go on now to help develop these action plans and implement them in their respective countries. So that's the end of my presentation. Any questions? We can probably wait till the end. So I'll stop sharing.
All right, can you guys see mine clearly? Plan to perch?
Yes.
Awesome. We'll just head over. And the switch is good?
Very good.
All right, perfect. Cool. All right, well, thanks for your talk, Justin. Just like how the Conservation Action Planning Workshop transitioned into our current project, my talk will focus on hopefully giving some of the persons here who have recently completed their own conservation action plans to get a bit of encouragement and, more importantly, some practical tools for the next steps that will take you guys from plan to perch. And so I'll be speaking about some of the steps that we took to help us translate the strategy that we had built almost 2 years ago into an on-the-ground action plan for the Jamaican blackbird. All right, so I'll focus on the introduction. I'll introduce my organization very briefly. I'll introduce the project that we're working on. I'll talk about four main things that I think are important for bridging the plan to action. I'll then speak about some of the challenges that come out of those four areas, and then early signs of progress on our project, and then we'll close off with some lessons learned. All right, so naturally, the name of our project is a little long, but it is implementing the Jamaican Blackbird Conservation Action Plan in the Blue and Jonker Mountains, the key biodiversity area in Jamaica. As Justin would have explained to you guys, the Jamaican blackbird is endangered, our most endangered species here. Rewild came and we, along with many other organizations in the country, spent 2 days creating the draft of a conservation action plan and then followed up with several meetings afterwards to finalize that draft. I work for Jamaica Environment Trust. We are a small NGO here in Jamaica. We have a team of 5 currently, and we work to protect Jamaica's natural resources using 3 main pillars. So we do lawn advocacy, we do environmental education, and we also do conservation. And so as an organization, when we looked at the CAP in its entirety, we highlighted that there are certain areas based on our organizational strength that it made sense to really work on. And so then one of the goals that we had thought about, the 5-year goal that I had set. So by 2029, we'd want to see that Jamaican blackbird habitat in the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park specifically would be under improved management, and the threat of habitat loss from anthropogenic sources will be reduced. So I'm going to touch on a little bit more about why we chose that and how we got to that decision. But I want to share with you guys one of the first challenges that we encountered, which may not be the same for the other birds that Justin spoke about. But one of the first challenges that we encountered, which I think really helped us to shape how we go about doing the project, is actually getting persons to understand what our conservation target was. Now, I'll say to you guys, the Jamaican blackbird is endangered, and you may have an appreciation of it because of the crowd that's here. But conservation is not limited to scientists, it's limited to everybody. And so when I get up and I say to a Jamaican, yo, the Jamaican blackbird is endangered, most of them will say to me, Justin, I just drove past 200 on the power line. You can't trick me. They're not endangered. And they would be right. Because in Jamaica, on any given day, you could see any one of 8 black colored birds. And so this was one of our first challenges that we had to go through. If you can come in the country and you can see any of these black colored birds, how do we convince you that one actually is endangered? And then how do we educate you to identify that bird, to understand where that bird lives, and to understand your interaction with that bird. So it was an interesting challenge, but it was a good challenge because it also brings up to people that they actually were bird watching already. Just by noticing birds on your way home, you're already starting to move towards conservation. So if you're able to guess, becomes up to you. This bird is actually our Jamaican blackbird. It's only found in two places in the country, in the Blue and Jonker Mountains and in Cockpit Country, and it's limited to old growth forest, as Justin said. Some of these other birds are also limited to the forest, but quite a few of them can be found quite across the island. So, as I said earlier, there are four areas that you really want to focus on when you're thinking about moving from a plan to action. So, the first thing that we decided to do coming out of the Conservation Action Planning Workshop, we got a series of actions that needed to take place over multiple years. Some of the goals you would have seen or set for yourselves are 20 years into the future. Some maybe 1, 2, 3, or 5 years in the future. However, every goal has quite a few actions associated with them. It's important, not just as an individual, but for your team and for everybody involved to be able to prioritize which actions are important to start with. There has to be an understanding of what actions will support other actions, what actions need certain resources, and then also the time sensitivity of certain actions so that your project can flow. After you've decided on which actions to prioritize, you don't just run under the actions. You have to then look at your organization, just like what we did at JET, and we said, what are our strengths? I personally love field research. I'd love to be in the woods right now looking for this bird, but that's not the strength of my organization. The strength of my organization is land advocacy, conservation of a different kind, and environmental education. And so we built our project proposal and we chose the parts of the conservation action plan that made sense for our organization. And so we settled on that, even though there was a whole lot more that we really wanted to do. After we've prioritized and we looked at our strengths, the next step was to consult our relevant stakeholders. If anybody's involved with project management, you'll understand that stakeholder consultation is something that never really stops. Even when your project is finished on paper, the sustainability of your project often depends on your ability to sustain those relationships with the stakeholders. Now, I want to emphasize the word relevant because your stakeholders are not always who you may assume them to be, especially at a superficial level. Your stakeholders may also not all have the same level of importance, influence, and impact on your project at the same time. You may have a stakeholder who comes in and is really important in month 24 of a 36-month process, but you can't wait until month 23 to engage that stakeholder. That engagement often starts from month 1. It may even start before in the proposal process. But the management of that stakeholder is important so that they're connected with your projects, so that when they come in on month 24, you hit the ground running. So a really good thing to help you figure out who your important stakeholders are is doing a situation analysis and doing a stakeholder mapping and really asking a lot of why questions. Why is this obstacle here? Who's responsible for putting it there? Who can help us move it? So after you consult your relevant stakeholders, you want to then move on to the process that a lot of us are quite familiar with, writing a strong proposal. So I chose to separate writing a strong proposal from securing funding because while the two are linked, they're not always the same thing. A strong proposal doesn't always result in immediate funding, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't a strong proposal. It could be for the wrong funder, it could be for the wrong time. It may be that you have the incorrect team at the time, but your proposal still may be strong. It's really important for you to write a strong proposal because there are a lot of things that come out of that process. Institutional capacity building can come out of that process if you identify gaps in your institution. Gaps in the very same conservation action plan that you would have prepared as a group do come out when you're writing a strong proposal. And even understanding of the strengths and weaknesses in your own team can come out if you take the time to really write a good proposal. And the help for writing a good proposal really is there available. For example, CEPF has funded this project that we're speaking about, and there was support at the letter of inquiry stage, which is like a concept note. There was support at the full proposal stage, even though it was quite challenging, and there has been consistent support after. Sometimes you may need to seek external support, which is great when it comes to networking. The persons on this call, quite a few of them could help you write a strong proposal if you know to ask the right questions and if you know how to put in the time. And then, of course, something that's really critical is securing funding. Funding can come in the form of grant funding if you write a proposal. Funding can come in the form of donations. Funding can come in the form of memberships if you're that kind of organization. And you can also have co-funding, which is non-cash, whether it's in the form of a partnership from another organization, volunteers helping out. But it's important that you understand the different sources of funding, understand how much you need, and understand how to get it and manage it. One tool that's been really helpful to us here, very helpful to me, not just at JET, but in a career sense, is conservation standards. We did a course, or I did a course on conservation standards, a pretty short one. I look forward to the full course. Thank you, Jim. And so conservation standards really helped me and helped our organization put into perspective everything from the start to the end of the project and to understand how to manage that throughout. It really made you think about what are the true problems that we're trying to solve and how do we go about solving those problems. And it helps us to streamline that in a way so that our projects can be helped by other persons. How do I describe it a little bit better? Conservation standards isn't per se introducing something that's novel or new, but we're doing it in a way that it can be brought across the table. And so I found it really helpful to me, not just with the writing of the project, but as the project evolves and monitoring and implementing to ask the right questions. Mm, Most persons may not have heard about it, but we've heard about it a lot through Birds Caribbean, and I found it to be something really useful. And I hope that you all can get a taste of this course at some point in the future. Really, really effective. All right. So some challenges that we faced so far. Understanding the landscape. As Justin explained, the workshops are for 2 days. You will meet quite a few persons, but the workshops cannot stop right there. You'll get a lot of names, you get some understanding, but there is time needed to actually understand what does that organization do? What do these persons do? How do I complement the work that they're doing so that we're not recreating the wheel and that we're making progress at a pace that actually makes sense and is sustainable? Stakeholder engagement is often dependent on stakeholder availability. No matter how important or impactful your project may be, no matter how significant it is, no matter how much money it has, stakeholders still have their own lives and still have their own projects. And the responsibility is on you as a project manager to ensure that you can match that flexibility so that you do what you need to do in order to get your project done. Does it mean that you have to stay later days, work on the weekends, work on holidays? That's for you to decide as you implement your project. But you do have a timeline, as does everyone else. So that flexibility is important to connect with persons. Any good project has extensive collaboration. Extensive collaboration means a lot of opinions, a lot of questions, and sometimes not many answers. But as a project manager, you are required to provide those answers or at least find them. And balancing demands can get very tricky. Earlier, we spoke about your project stakeholder who may come in month 24, but they may have demands starting from month 12. How do you balance that? How important is that demand? How important is that stakeholder? And then financial management, something I really like to stress a lot. And the importance of it, I always impress the people, is that it's regional. If I manage my finances here at JET very well, and my organization looks good, and by extension, the country of Jamaica looks good because we can build a capacity and we can say, hey, we can manage funds, we can manage larger projects. If Jamaica looks good, the Caribbean looks good. If I try to help another NGO, it works. if Jamaica tries to help another country, it works. But we do need to be better at acquiring funds, reporting on funds, and doing all the small steps that we may not like because it is tedious. But it's really important for sustainability that we know that I could pay someone to monitor and protect this forest for the next 10 years because life does happen. There's a lot that's going on around conservation that we also need to fund. All right, so some early signs of progress that we're having so far. We had aimed to train 30 farmers in the Blue Mountains. So far, we've trained over 40 on bird identification and agroforestry. We are fortunate to be able to adjust our budget so that we'll have a second round of training partnered with our government agencies to do soil health and conservation and the coffee value chain. Because we found that if we could help farmers to earn more money from their farming, they would be better stewards of land and they will be better conservation persons. We've had some institutional capacity being built over the time. We've improved our data protection policies according to our laws. We have had gender training and become more inclusive in the way that we write our projects and the way that we implement our projects to consider gender differences. And we have also had training on our human resources and our operations to ensure that internally we're running as smooth as possible. Probably the funnest part of what we've done so far is our community engagement and citizen science. This looks like a BioBlitz or has looked like a BioBlitz. And for those who don't know, a BioBlitz is when we choose a geographical location. Could be as small as your backyard, it could be as large as the entire country. And what you're trying to do is trying to capture all the species in that environment, whether it's in a day, an hour, a week, and then you now know how rich your community is. The most amazing part about the BioBlitz I find is it really transforms the walk that you take every day into now like a scientific exploration. People will go from saying, yeah man, that's bush. I know I have 20 species of plants and there's a snake under that rock. I can check once in a while. And there are 5 birds that come to my backyard that I kind of knew but I never knew from before. And so the BioBlitzes were put into place to really help us get a holistic approach to conservation because we appreciate that while we understand the value of conservation, the reality in these communities is very different. They're different things, they're different experiences, they're different levels of knowledge. And so sometimes you do have to bring the level of knowledge up first before you can really start pushing out the message that you want. All right, I'll finish up with some lessons learned. Um, 2 lessons I really want to focus on and leave with you guys. One, things take longer and shorter than you may assume. So start as soon as you can. For example, our workshop was in October 2023. By December of that same year, we were able to submit the LOI, even though it was quite tedious to get it done, but I'm happy we did. CPF came back to us and we were able to submit a full proposal by April 2024 of the next year. And then by June of that year, our project had started. So to me, that was a lot quicker than I thought that whole process would have taken. At the start of our project, we were not able to open a bank account, so it took us another 2 months to actually receive funding because of how long it took to open a bank account. I would have never expected that would have taken us 2 months to open a bank account, especially since we already have several bank accounts open with that same bank. But things take longer and shorter than you may expect. And the last point, which I found has been the most important for us with this project, is show up. It's really important that you show up regardless of what you think may happen on the day. We have had site visits to communities when we are quite literally going to visit one person who we've never met before, but we've heard this person is a farmer. And we're hoping that that farmer will have the time to talk to us and that they'll buy into the project. If we weren't confident about the impact of our project and the steps that we'd have taken, we may not have been comfortable going and speaking to one person. But every conversation that we've had with one person has turned into a workshop of 30 and has turned into a BioBlitz of over 100. And so if you're very clear about where you're going and the goals you're trying to reach, it'll help you when you're doing the small steps that don't always feel impactful. So things take longer and shorter, so start as soon as you can and always show up, no matter how small the event may seem. And that's it for me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much to both Justins. I really enjoyed getting to learn more about your island conservation. We have time for probably one question, maybe two, if anyone has a question. I don't want to bogart you guys with all of mine. And feel free to type in the chat or speak out. Okay, there's a question in the chat from Andrew. He says, thank you both for great presentations. While working with American Bird Conservancy previously, they were working with Marlon Beale, rest in peace, and they'd been talking about trying to reduce burning and collecting of wood around the edges of core habitat for the Jamaican blackbird as these activities increase drying and change moisture regimens and degrade habitat. Is burning and wood collection still something that is A, a threat, and B, you're working to address?
Okay. I would say yes, burning and wood collection is an issue. I can't say the extent to which it is. For our project, the threat that we focused on was coffee farmers and how they interact with the forest, especially through deforestation. However, we have had challenges with burning and wood collection in the Blue and Junker Mountains. Are we working to address it? I mean, I'd like to expand the project to address it. So I'll say hopefully we can add that section to it. But it is indeed a threat.
All right, and Steve has a question. What specific actions are you taking to achieve the goals you set for the Jamaican blackbird? For example, 80% of community members near habitat can identify these species.
Okay. So we go with twofold for that one. We do public education. First, we'd focus on the coffee farmers. And so they spend the most of the time probably interacting with the birds because they spend all day in their coffee fields. So our first workshop focused on bird identification, first by sight, like visually identifying a bird based on the colors, but more importantly, identification by function. So the farmer's first concern when they see a bird is that bird going to affect my coffee crops? And so we had to say, all right, if you see a parrot, for example, if you look at the bill of a parrot compared to the bill of a woodpecker, if that's all you can glimpse, or all you can glimpse is the shape of a bird, you can start to identify insectivorous versus frugivorous birds. Mm, And then to do broader, this is where the BioBlitzes come in. We have, can I show you one? I think I do have one here. We have some bird identification birds. Yeah, so we have some bird identification cards. Oh, the blur is killing me, but you kind of get it. Yeah, we have some bird identification cards that we leave in the communities. So there you go. And we leave that with the kids, most importantly, because education starts from there. And we leave it with all the farmers that we come in contact with. And then the bio blitzes are designed to be highly educational. So it's more than just a walk, it's a walk with identification and identification partnered with function. So they have something to remember it by.
So I don't know how everyone's feeling. We are at 1 o'clock. I don't know if you guys have anything coming up. I'm gonna let Paul answer for that
Sure.
question.
Yeah. Two more. There are two more questions in the chat, and I think we've got just enough time for those.
Okay. All right, I'm going to answer them in reverse. So, Anne, do we find general differences in receptivity of farmers? Generational, rather. I would like to say yes to that, but we haven't gotten to the younger farmers as yet. The older farmers have been very receptive. There have been a few harder nuts to crack, who are just like, why are you showing me birds? So, we expected that. But the more that we show up is the softer they come over time because there is a lot of fatigue in these communities from projects coming in and going out. We would like to look more at why it is that young farmers are staying away from farming. We know it's quite a laborious task, but we are looking into trying to understand why it is that we haven't seen more than a handful of young persons in farming. What broader impacts have you seen resulting from the project thus far? Positive ramifications extending beyond conservation. Okay, so thanks for that, Imbar. So we actually had tried to put it in place first. So if you look at our Bioblitz, for example, our Bioblitzes start at 8 o'clock, even though the prime time for birding is like 5:30 in the morning. But people are coming out. But we encourage them to say the Bioblitz is more than just about the bird, because not everyone may have an appreciation for the bird, but if you have an appreciation for the forest, that will flow over into good habitat for the bird. And so we found that persons will come to us and say, "Hey, I don't grow coffee. I'm not really into birds, but I grow goats and I'm really into sustainable farming. Could I also have some trees? Could I also attend the workshops?" And then each community has asked us to do something more with the kids. Can we come and do more summer camps? We've received requests to write more proposals for environmental focused projects in the communities. So persons are really taking to it well. And so we're happy that people are looking for it more than just the birds.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you, both Justin Springer and Sanders. I really appreciate your work and how you've presented this material to help people in where they are and what they're doing. So appreciate it. And I would like to close out the session today with some reminders. Next month, we have another webinar that will be again on the second Friday in September. Additionally, we will have a forum for species working groups all across the continent, and hope that you would join us. We're going to review some of the results of a recent survey that we conducted in partnership to get at understand some of the impacts of the federal funding issues that have occurred of late in the United States. Well, Monday, August the 11th, marks the end of my 47th year in my career in wildlife conservation. I started that in 1978, and these last 4 years with Road to Recovery have been a special part of that. I'll be retiring at the end of this month, and there will be a new executive director next month, as I mentioned. I will continue to work with and help any way that I can in the Road to Recovery, because I think this mission is really important. It's been an honor to help start and kind of push this movement forward and launching it a few years ago, because it's so important to the recovery of our tipping point species. I hope this momentum continues with now a full-time executive director. As most of you know, I've been a part-time person for the last few years. That's all my time could afford, if you will. And now it's great that we're going to have the resources needed for a full-time person. Please stay involved and contribute to this effort, this movement on Road to Recovery. As I said, I think it's incredibly important. We hope to announce the new executive director next month, but in the meantime, a tremendous staff of Katie Holland, Kat Temple, and Esmeralda Bravo have been amazing to work with, and will continue to do the great work beyond the next month and years. So with that, I close out today and wish you a happy weekend. Enjoy yourself and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
all. Thank
everyone.
you, Paul. And thank you both, Justins.
Thank you.